All right, so let's dive into some history today. It's a fascinating corner of history, but it's also pretty disturbing. We're going to be looking at Adolf Eichmann,
Oh, yeah.
the Nazi official who basically orchestrated all the logistics for the Holocaust.
You know what's really chilling about Eichmann is that he wasn't, you know what, you think of like the stereotypical raving fanatic.
Right.
He was a bureaucrat. He was a master of logistics.
Right.
But that makes him even more terrifying in a way.
It does, yeah.
Like a human cog in this just monstrous machine.
Yeah. And to try to understand how someone like that operates, we're going to be using a source that analyzes him through a really interesting lens, the Enneagram.
Okay.
Now, you might already be familiar with the Enneagram as like a personality typing system.
Yeah.
But what we want to explore today is how it might help us understand the motivations and fears behind someone like Eichmann. The source we're looking at argues that he fits the social 6 type.
Right. And it's important to remember, the Enneagram isn't just about predicting what kind of coffee you're going to order. Or,
Sure.
It's a system for understanding these deeper patterns and how people view the world and what drives them. The social 6 particularly craves security, and they find that security through belonging to a group and adhering to the rules of that group.
Yeah.
So loyalty to authority figures is super important to them, and sometimes that loyalty overrides their own, moral judgment.
Yeah, and that's where it gets really unsettling when we start to apply this to Eichmann.
Yeah.
His defense at his trial was the infamous just following orders.
Right.
But the source argues that it wasn't just like a legal defense, It was a genuine belief that because he was operating within the rules of the system, he was absolved from any personal responsibility.
Exactly. The source calls this blind obedience,
Right.
which is a really classic trait of that social 6, especially when they're under pressure.
Yeah.
They can get so fixated on maintaining order and fulfilling their duty to the group
Right.
that the larger ethical picture gets totally lost.
It makes you think about those times that you felt pressured to go along with a group, even when something felt a little bit off.
Yeah,
That kind of unease you feel disagreeing, that's kind of part of what the social 6 fears.
for sure.
Only in Eichmann's case, it wasn't about, skipping class or something like that.
Right.
It was about orchestrating genocide.
Yeah, and the source points out he did it with terrifying efficiency.
Yes, he did.
The source uses a really striking phrase to describe him. It calls him like an electronic brain.
Wow.
It paints this picture of him as someone who's not even making moral choices. He's just processing information and carrying out orders, like he was programmed almost.
Yeah, and yet he did try to rationalize his actions in his own very twisted way. The source mentions that he even invoked Kant during his trial.
It's kind of mind-boggling, isn't it?
It is.
He tried to use Kantian ethics, which emphasize universal moral principles,
Right.
to justify his actions. But it shows how desperately a social 6 needs rules and a framework to function, even if that framework is completely warped.
So we're starting to see how this Enneagram type, when you combine it with a horrific ideology in a totalitarian regime, could create a monster of efficiency.
Yeah.
But was it all about duty and fitting in for Eichmann?
Right.
The source compares him to another Enneagram type, the type 3, the achiever.
Uh-huh.
They're both very highly productive, but there is a key difference.
Absolutely. Type 3s are driven by personal ambition. They want to be seen as successful.
Right.
But Eichmann wasn't after fame or anything. He
Yeah.
was, in a way, the ultimate company man, just working for the wrong company.
Oh, yeah.
His satisfaction came from perfectly fulfilling his role within that Nazi system.
So it's like he found this twisted sense of purpose in being like the perfect gear in this genocidal machine. His need to belong, to follow the rules, was so powerful that it just overshadowed any individual moral responsibility.
And that's why understanding the Enneagram in this context isn't about excusing Eichmann.
Right.
It's about trying to grasp those human factors, those personality dynamics that could contribute to something this horrific.
It raises a question, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
If someone like Eichmann could become a cog in that machine,
Yeah.
what does that say about the potential for evil within any system and within any personality type, given the wrong circumstances?
Yeah.
It's a chilling thought.
It certainly is. And that's why the source argues that understanding tools like the Enneagram can be so important, not to label people,
Right.
but to understand the interplay of personality and circumstance.
Okay, so we've laid some groundwork here, but there's a lot more to unpack.
Yeah.
The source dives into some really interesting nuances about Eichmann's inner world, his attempts to justify his actions, and how his social 6 traits might have manifested in specific ways. We'll get into all of that.
After the break.
Yeah, right after this.
Yeah.
So, we were talking about that phrase, an electronic brain.
Right.
It's just such a powerful metaphor for how, in its unhealthy state, the social six can essentially, shut down critical thinking.
Yeah.
Just become obsessed with following procedures.
So it wasn't that he lacked intelligence.
It was that his intelligence was completely channeled into making the Nazi system work, no matter the human cost.
Exactly. And this ties in with what the source talks about with Eichmann's obsession with duty.
Right.
For him, fulfilling his obligations within that Nazi hierarchy, that became like his only moral compass.
Yeah.
He seemed to believe that as long as he was a good soldier, a good bureaucrat, he was absolved of any personal guilt for the horrors he was part of.
Which is, of course, a horrifying distortion of duty.
Totally.
It's taking the idea of being a good employee to a nightmarish extreme.
It really is. And that's where the Enneagram can be so helpful.
Yeah.
It allows us to see how these seemingly normal personality traits,
Right.
when they're taken to an extreme and combined with a toxic ideology, can lead to monstrous results.
Yeah, it's a reminder that, we all have these shadow sides.
Oh, for sure.
These potentials for darkness within us.
Yeah.
It's just that most of us, thankfully, never encounter a system that weaponizes their shadows in the way that Nazism did.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important to be aware of our own vulnerabilities, our own potential for blind obedience or unquestioning loyalty.
Right.
The Enneagram can be a tool for self-awareness,
Yeah.
for understanding those tendencies within ourselves,
Right.
and making sure that we don't fall prey to them.
It's like a warning system.
Yeah.
Helping us to recognize when we might be slipping into that electronic brain mode, sacrificing our own moral compass just to fit in or follow orders.
Precisely. And it's not just about, these grand historical evils like the Holocaust. It's about recognizing those patterns in our everyday lives, in our workplaces, our communities, even our families.
So how do we guard against this?
Right.
How do we make sure that we're not just blindly following rules, even when they're harmful or unjust? The source makes a fascinating comparison between Eichmann and the philosopher Immanuel Kant,
Right.
who's also often associated with the social six type.
Okay.
They both had this strong sense of duty, but their motivations were completely different.
It is a striking comparison. But here's the key difference.
Okay.
Kant's sense of duty was rooted in reason and individual moral responsibility. He believed we should act according to principles that could be applied universally.
Right.
Principles that would be just and ethical for everyone.
Right.
Eichmann, on the other hand, twisted that concept to justify blind obedience to Hitler.
So it's not just about the personality type itself.
Right.
It's about how we choose to interpret and act on our core motivations.
Exactly. The Enneagram can illuminate our tendencies, but we have to cultivate the critical thinking and moral courage to make sure those tendencies don't lead us down a dark path.
This is making me think about, the choices we make every single day.
Yeah.
Do we conform to the group even when it feels wrong? Or do we speak up?
Right.
Do we blindly follow orders, or do we question authority?
It's a big question.
These aren't just, abstract philosophical questions.
Yeah.
They're deeply personal ones.
They are. And that's why this exploration of the Enneagram in the context of history can be so powerful. It pushes us to confront those questions head on.
It's heavy stuff, but vital to consider. The source doesn't let Eichmann off the hook for his actions.
No.
But it does make you wonder, how much were those actions shaped by his personality?
Yeah.
By this desperate need to belong, to find security in a system, even a monstrous one.
And that leads us to another really crucial point that the source raises.
Okay.
The role of belief. Even while claiming he was just following orders,
Right.
there's evidence that Eichmann did internalize at least some aspects of Nazi ideology,
Right.
especially the anti-Semitism.
So it wasn't entirely mechanical for him.
Right.
There was some level of belief, however twisted in what he was doing.
That seems to be the case, and this highlights another important aspect of that social six.
Okay.
Their need to belong can be so strong that they'll adopt the beliefs of the group, even if those beliefs are harmful or hateful. It's like they seek safety and conformity, even at the cost of their own moral compass.
It's a reminder that even the most extreme ideologies can appeal to a very basic human need.
Yeah.
The need to belong, to feel like you're a part of something bigger than yourself.
Exactly. And that's why it's so crucial to be discerning about the groups we align ourselves with,
Right.
the ideologies that we embrace.
Yeah.
We need to ask ourselves, are these beliefs truly aligned with my values, or am I just going along with the crowd?
We've covered a lot of ground here, But before we wrap up, I want to go back to this idea of the electronic brain and Eichmann's chilling efficiency. The source mentions something that really struck me. It describes him as like the ultimate company man just working for the wrong company.
Yeah.
What's fascinating is that the source also compares him to the type 3 personality, the achiever.
Mm-hmm.
Both types can be incredibly productive,
Mm-hmm.
but their underlying motivations are distinct. Can you elaborate on that?
Absolutely. While both types can excel at getting things done,
Right.
their core drivers are different. Type 3s are fueled by personal ambition, a desire for recognition and success.
Mm-hmm.
They want to be seen as the best, the most accomplished.
Right.
Eichmann, on the other hand, wasn't driven by ego or a desire for personal glory.
Right.
He was seeking something else entirely, a sense of belonging and security within a system.
It's almost like he found this perverse sense of fulfillment in being like the perfect cog in the Nazi machine.
And that's where the danger lies.
Yeah.
When that need for belonging, for order and structure becomes so dominant, it can override everything else,
Right.
including basic human empathy and compassion.
Okay, so we're gonna wrap up this deep dive and
Yeah.
talk about the source's final thoughts on Eichmann and the Enneagram and what it all means for us today. Okay, so we've been, unpacking this whole idea of Eichmann as like this ultimate company man driven by his social six need for belonging and order, even in this like totally horrific system.
Yeah.
And it raises the question, how do we make sure that our own need to belong doesn't lead us down a similar path, even if it's, on a much smaller scale, obviously.
That's the big question that the source leaves us with.
Yeah.
It doesn't give us easy answers,
Right.
but it really emphasizes how important critical thinking is, cultivating that strong moral compass that isn't just based on external authority.
Right.
We have to be willing to question the rules,
Yeah.
to challenge the status quo, even when it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's like that saying, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing.
Exactly.
We can't just blindly follow orders or go along with the group.
Yeah,
We have to be active in shaping our own moral choices.
absolutely. And that's why this whole deep dive into Eichmann and the Enneagram has been so thought-provoking. It's not just about understanding a historical figure, it's about understanding ourselves,
Right.
our own vulnerabilities and our own potential for both good and evil.
Yeah, it's heavy stuff, but incredibly important to grapple with.
Yeah.
How do we make sure that our need to belong, our desire for security, doesn't lead us down a path of blind obedience? How do we cultivate the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it means going against the grain?
Those are the questions worth wrestling with. And the Enneagram can be such a valuable tool in that process.
Right.
It helps us understand those deeper motivations, those patterns within ourselves, so we can make more conscious choices.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Mhm.
what are some key takeaways that you think our listeners should keep in mind?
Well, first, it's so important to remember that personality is complex. The Enneagram is a helpful framework, but it's not about putting people in boxes.
Right.
Even within a single type, there's a huge range of healthy and unhealthy behaviors.
Right.
So understanding your Enneagram type can provide insights, but it doesn't dictate your actions.
It's not an excuse. Eichmann's social six traits may have contributed to his actions,
Right.
but ultimately he was responsible for his choices.
Exactly. And second, this deep dive really highlights the power of systems.
Yes.
Eichmann wasn't operating in a vacuum.
Right.
He was part of a totalitarian regime that systematically dehumanized an entire group of people.
Right.
We need to be aware of the systems we're part of and how they might be influencing our behavior, even in subtle ways.
It's so easy to just get caught up in the day-to-day, to just go along with the way things are.
Yeah.
This is a powerful reminder to step back and ask those critical questions. What am I contributing to? Am I upholding values that I truly believe in?
And finally, I think this deep dive really underscores the importance of individual moral responsibility.
Yeah.
We can't outsource our ethics to an authority figure or a group. We each have a responsibility to develop our own moral compass and to act in accordance with it, even when it's difficult.
That's a really powerful message to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the dark heart of history and what it can teach us about ourselves.
Thank you for having me. It's been a fascinating exploration.
And to our listeners, we hope this deep dive has given you some food for thought.
Yeah,
It's not easy to confront these aspects of human nature,
for sure.
but understanding them is the first step toward creating a more just and compassionate world. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep striving to make conscious, ethical choices in all you do.